Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest timed exclusive feature for producer patrons. This month, we're going to try something new, and instead of doing a normal interview with someone from around the industry, we are going to do a little deep dive on the big three. So, Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo's financials. We're going to look at their fiscal reporting. We're going to look into their investments. We're going to look into how they see the marketplace, where they're growing, how they're growing, and what they're planning to do over the next couple of years. So, I thought that would do what we like to do here at Season Gaming, which is share insight, share factual data, kind of dispel rumors and myths you may see on the Twitter space or social media. And so you'll have to give me feedback afterwards and let me know what you think of this. If you enjoyed it, all of the data that you see or will see here shortly is all pulled directly from the big three. It's directly from their financial reports, their fiscal reporting, like I said. So hope you enjoy it. I give you as much insight as I can. As always, you can break these things down a million different ways, and there's a lot of other things you can discuss. So if you have a question for me, reach out on Patreon, reach out on Discord, leave a comment, do what you will. I'm always happy to discuss this stuff. I kind of enjoy it, even though it can be pretty dry at times. So other than that, the only other thing I want to shout out is there's a lot of different data points and chart sizes and stuff, so it won't always fit the screen perfectly. Sorry about that, but it is what it is. I wanted to present it in its natural state so you know where I got it from. Other than that, I hope you enjoy. Like I said, please let me know what you think, and we'll see you next month. All right, so I'm going to start with the big three. I'm going to start with Nintendo because of our community that interacts with us at Season Gaming. I think that Nintendo is focused on the least. And while we always hear that the Switch is a sales monster, and we know that to be a fact, of course, it is interesting to me that we kind of study Nintendo and what they're doing in the marketplace in terms of their actual revenue and financials, the least. And so I want to kind of jump into that. And I've been reviewing all of their financials, as with the big three. And the nice thing here about Nintendo is that they have specific links on their site where you can break down all of the information that they provide to investors. And they give you a lot of detail with a lot of nice little interactive graphs, which you can see in front of you. So we're going to start with this one, which essentially shows you how they're selling across the different regions in terms of software and hardware sales in their fiscal years. So even though this chart here says 3 of each year, that's the end of their fiscal year, as we discussed, March 31st. And what should jump out to you right away is that Nintendo saw a decline in their 2022 fiscal year, which ended March 31st. So we know that last year, Switch sales just absolutely crushed it the holiday prior. So that would be holiday 2020 and into 2021. Absolutely crushed it. And that's where you see this 2021 graph was the best year they've ever had as a company. And then in 2022, you can see a decline. And as you would expect, a lot of that is attributed to two things, primarily being the semiconductor shortage and Nintendo. According to Nintendo, if you read through some of their actual statements about this, it's that they were unable to sell as many Switches as they would have liked. Now, we still know that they sold a ton of Switches, which we'll get to in a second. But a couple other things jump out here. As you can see, I have selected on the graph the different colors for the different regions, and we'll break this down more here in a second. But the only one that continued to increase in terms of software is the Americas. So you can see this here with this pink line that continues to go up in 2022. If you actually look at their software in Europe, it's relatively flat, and their software in Japan actually declined, which is interesting. So while again, we know that the Switch is a sales monster in Japan, software-wise, they actually sold less in their last fiscal year than they did in 2021. So let's jump over to the next slide. This is just a quick breakdown of the actual financials. So when you're talking about revenue and overall revenue for Nintendo, in their fiscal year, they made just over 13 billion, which is pretty strong. 2.8 billion of that was the fourth quarter. Now, remember, this is where these fiscal quarters kind of get weird, right? The fourth quarter for them was January to March of this year. So that was their fourth quarter. You can see their operating income here, their digital sales, and of course their mobile and IP revenue, which we'll touch on a little more as well, but it's a small factor overall. So here's where things start to get even more interesting. So getting back to some of the charts you can find on their site, you can see their fiscal year 2021 and their fiscal year 2022, as we said, and you can see in terms of just general net sales, they declined. Although if you look at their actual operating profit and their kind of profit margins across various things, it's very, very similar from one year to the next. Now, here's where things get interesting for Nintendo is that even from a forecasting standpoint, they're forecasting continual decline, and not just in sales, but in terms of their profit margins as well, pretty much across the board here, as you can see in their forecast. And that is explained for two reasons. One, they believe the semiconductor shortage is going to continue, and so that'll continue to impact their hardware. But they are also investing into infrastructure and what they believe to be needed in their future. And so, excuse me, if you come here to their actual forecast for next year, you can see that they're predicting their sales will drop. However, their profits will drop by a much bigger margin. And so they sold 23 million Switches in 2022, fiscal year 2022. They're forecasting 21 million units next year. They're also forecasting a decline in their software sales. But it's the profit margins that are really interesting. And so it's hard to pull the details. I had to dive into a bunch of quotes and written things that I will link to below. But essentially, what Nintendo is doing is they are more than doubling their investment into content, services, and infrastructure. And so we often talk about Nintendo as being so far behind as it relates to online infrastructure, kind of friend systems, party systems, those types of things. And it would seem, at least on the surface, and based from what we know from these records here, that they recognize that at least to some degree, and that they are investing towards that in the future. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm actually kind of really curious to see, Nintendo in the coming years, how they start to kind of change their direction. We're going to talk a lot more about direction with Xbox and PlayStation, but if you, again, looking at what we're looking at here, you can tell that Nintendo is starting to see the writing on the wall that, hey, they've got to make some significant improvements. It's also interesting that here is breaking this down a little more for their prior year. You can see the small decline. Playing cards, we're going to leave that one alone. Don't worry about that. But just this regional sales ratio, you saw the lines on the other chart, but here specifically, you can see we always talk about Japan being this giant market for Nintendo and PlayStation. But as you can see, Japan only represents 21% of Switch sales. It's actually the Americas that are nearly 43.5%, and then you've got Europe with another quarter, and then you've got the other markets with another 10%. So as much as we like to think that Japan really kind of buoys the Switch and PlayStation, and we'll see this on the PlayStation side as well, it's actually the rest of the world. You can see they actually have a proportion of overseas sales here, which is nearly 80%. So Nintendo's a really interesting one. I continue to think that they are going to drive, as they always do, on their IP strength and other things. But I think that this chart in particular, the forecast chart here, showing that even with their big releases coming, that their net sales are going to decline. I think that they know the writing on the wall, that the Switch is getting a little long in the tooth. Let's not forget that March of this year represented the 5th year already for the Switch, and that they know that they need some type of major update. Now, personally, I don't believe they get away from the Switch. It is far too successful. It's their most successful console of all time at this point. It's going to be. So I believe that they'll continue with the Switch, probably do what we've all been hoping for some time now, which is something like a Switch Pro, and which will be 100% compatible with the existing software, the existing accessories, everything that goes with the Switch now. But they bring the Switch itself into kind of the modern age that will support higher resolutions, frame rates, etc. Let's just hope they don't call it the Switch U. For now, that's about what you have on Nintendo. Like I said, there are some quotes directly from the president and CEO of Nintendo around what they're doing in the future. As I said, you can find even more information on those links below. But Nintendo's in pretty good shape. They're investing into their future, and they still make an awful lot of money a year. So now, let's jump on over to Xbox land. I'm going to do Xbox next because if you follow me, you follow Season Gaming, you know that I've written about Xbox extensively. I've written for years now where their technology is driving, what they're doing with their ecosystem, where they're investing their resources, and how they're increasing those investments. So this is the one that I'm probably most well versed on. which is kind of strange, as you see, because it's the one they hide the most. So Xbox, obviously being part of Microsoft, when they report their fiscal earnings, they hide a lot of specific Xbox data within the Microsoft data. So you have to kind of dive into their games and services segment. And even then, it breaks down very lightly. It's hard to get the level of detail that you get with Nintendo and PlayStation directly from Xbox. That said, we're going to start here with their fiscal years. And again, there's a little confusion here. So Microsoft's fiscal year is different from Nintendo's and PlayStation's in that they run basically July to June. And so at this point in time, as you're watching this, we're actually in their fourth quarter. And so we don't have a full picture of Xbox's fiscal year 2022 just yet. So I'm going to mix in some calendar year data here. But you can still get a really good picture of how Xbox is, kind of succeeding and improving their place in the market. So we'll start here. This is their fiscal year quarter since 2015, which was, 2 years into the Xbox One era. And as you can see, through fiscal year 2015, all the way really till about fiscal year 2019 and even a little bit into 2020, it's pretty flat. They were making some improvements. The revenue did go up, but it was not huge. And what you're seeing here is the boom that happened with COVID and the pandemic also coincided with the boom in Game Pass and some services and the Bethesda acquisition, which we'll touch on, to result in much stronger Xbox growth over the past couple of years. So you can see that here. And if you just kind of take this final 3 quarters here in this light orange, you can already see that for each quarter, in comparison to the prior fiscal year in 2021, quarter 1, 2, and 3, if you put them side by side, they are making more. Their revenue is higher so far in this fiscal year, quarter over quarter and year over year, which is really impressive. Shout out to Tweaktown for this nice slide. I found this one and I just really liked it because it gives you a nice, simple kind of look at where their fiscal year revenue has been over the past 5 years. So as I said, 17, 18, 19, and even into 20, you're talking about a difference in total of 4 years of only $2.5 billion. So the fiscal kind of revenue stream was pretty similar. Though, as you can see, in fiscal year 2020, this quarter 4 really booms up. And again, in fiscal year 2021, you're starting to include Bethesda now as well. So that's why you see this huge jump all of a sudden. But what you can see here in fiscal year 2021 is this $5 billion revenue in the second quarter. Now, again, this is where the quarters get weird, right? The second quarter for Xbox and Microsoft is actually the holiday quarter. So that's your, what we would consider the fourth quarter of the calendar year. And so that was the first time they had ever broken $5 billion in a quarter, which made news at the time. So, all right, so here's calendar year gaming revenue, and this is where you can start to see some of the differentiation as time has gone on. So if you compare 5 years from 2021 back to 2016, you can see just the huge jump in revenue stream, particularly as it relates to content and services, which is where your digital game sales are, Game Pass, of course, digital add-ons, microtransactions, all of those things, Xbox Live Gold still add up to content and services, and that's what you're really driving towards. The other thing that's interesting, of course, is that you see in 2019, see how small the orange box is in 2019? That's because you were on the tail end of that hardware with the Xbox One generation, right? Then you come into Xbox Series X and S, you see a small boost in 2020. And then in 2021, you see your best hardware year, I think, they've ever had, or at least since the early 360 generation. So fantastic improvement there. And now you're flipping this. I don't know why the colors are flipped here. I apologize. It's just the way it is. But you're looking at your fiscal year quarter 3s here, which is, again, that's January to March of the year. You can see how much of an incline we're seeing for Xbox right now. Not only in content and services, of course, but look at this hardware boost that they've gotten. So we've been hearing about how well the Xbox Series X and S are selling and how Microsoft put extra money forth to basically ensure that production of the Series consoles could continue against other products in the marketplace. Well, guess what? It's working. You can see it clear as day. They've reported on it in their fiscal earnings. And it's allowing Microsoft and Xbox to really kind of be one of the stronger players in terms of hardware, which we haven't heard from Xbox in a long time. In fact, Nadella, in their reporting on this, commented that they have taken market share for 2 quarters in a row now, which you start to look at some of these charts and you can kind of see that. So I think everyone on Twitter may know Daniel Ahmed, who's a Nico partner who breaks down some of these things. And here's some data from this last quarter that we saw, the first quarter calendar year of this year. And sorry to keep jumping between fiscal and calendar quarters. I know it gets confusing. So for the 3 months ending March 31st, gaming revenues were up 6%. This was a 3.74 billion revenue, and it was the best non-holiday quarter in Xbox history. So like I said, you can see that huge boost they're getting. As you kind of see on the prior slide, right? Content and services is 81% of their revenue. So what you'll see is something very similar on the PlayStation side, is that digital add-ons, Game Pass, subscriptions, DLC, all of those things are really where the revenue is in the market today, and why Xbox and PlayStation, and now Nintendo to a lesser degree, are driving towards it. So they continue to grow year over year. Fantastic quarter for Xbox. And then as you can see here, we already looked at this, coming back to this, but coming back to this slide, I wanted to do that because now that we're about to head into June, this is the final fiscal year quarter for Xbox and Microsoft. And so we'll get, a month from now, we'll get the report, which will fill this slide in for fiscal year 2022. And what you can expect to see for Xbox is another really strong quarter. I'll tell you that now. And you will see that it'll be the strongest fiscal year for Xbox they've ever had. So once you combine all of this up, I mean, if you look at this already, you're looking at about 712, you're looking at 13 billion. You're going to get up into the 17-ish, 18-ish billion range for their fiscal year for Xbox, which is just phenomenal. It's great to see the growth there. Now, like I said, that is Xbox and Bethesda as you know them today. If you start to look at the future and you assume Activision closes either late this year, early next year, as has been rumored, that will obviously change what this looks like. So if we revisit this next year, you're going to see an Xbox kind of fiscal year revenue that's going to look like it kind of exploded, but that's because Activision is going to be thrown into that mix as well. Activision and Blizzard, of course. So a lot of interesting things going on with Xbox. In terms of where their investment lies, I think it's obviously pretty clear. We talk about that pretty heavily, in that their investment lies in Game Pass and services, and they have a huge investment in terms of acquisitions and first-party growth as well. So we'll see. It's going to be really interesting to watch their continued growth in the coming years, as we know. And it's exciting times for both Xbox and Nintendo fans. And that will lead us, of course, to PlayStation, because PlayStation, it's an exciting time for their fans as well. And that's why I love doing these things, because all 3 of these companies are making moves for players. They're growing. They're investing in new things for us, and it's just awesome to see. So let me show you what PlayStation is up to. All right. So PlayStation, again, obviously a division of Sony, breaks down their things a little differently, and you have to go to their game and network services segment under Sony's fiscal reporting to really get into their numbers. Now, fortunately, I started to put this together about a week and a half ago, and then out of nowhere, Jim Ryan decided to do this fantastic presentation about all things PlayStation and where they are right now this week. And so I kind of went back to the drawing board on the PlayStation segment here, and what you're going to see is that we actually have more data from PlayStation than the other 2, I mean almost combined. But some of it is not only interesting for PlayStation, it's actually interesting because it speaks to the market itself, which is going to help me show you why these companies are making the moves they're making. So first things first, here is the fiscal year 2021, and if you notice right away, we're back to the same fiscal year as Nintendo. So Sony and PlayStation's fiscal year ended March 31st. So now we have a complete picture of what their fiscal year 2021 looks like. So this is Sony's report. The top line is the one we're most interested in, which is game and network services. And I have the actual individual slide to break this down further for you right somewhere right here, which we will look at a couple times. So fiscal year 2020 would have been last year. And remember, this is in billions of yen. So you kind of have to break this down. So fiscal year 2021, which just ended in March, was slightly better across the board for PlayStation than it was the year prior, with 2,739 billion yen revenue, which equates out to, as you can see here, which equates out to about $21.5 billion, depending on the exchange rate at the time. So, as we talked about kind of total revenue with the big three, Nintendo is about 13 billion annual. Xbox, as it stands today, is about 16 billion. That's with Bethesda, just to remind you. And they're looking to come in around the 17.5 billion when fiscal year 2022 is done for them. PlayStation is still far and away the largest, even with Bethesda added to Xbox. As I said, for the past 2 years now, they've been over 20 billion in revenue as a division. Now, what's really interesting here is they would have been even higher, but as we know, PlayStation, especially PlayStation 5, has been severely impacted by the the semiconductor shortage. And so there's a couple lines I want to call out on here. Don't try to look at all these numbers because you'll drive yourself crazy. But as I said, the revenue, the sales are really similar. If you look at fiscal year 2020, they had 1.594 million game software sales. They had 1.55 in 2021. So again, very close and similar. The big difference is that in fiscal year 2020, they sold 5.7 million PlayStation 4s, whereas last year they sold only 1 million because PlayStation 4 is obviously near, at the end of its life now. PlayStation 5 increased, but it didn't increase enough to make up the gap of PlayStation 4. In fact, Sony and PlayStation had to, they came in 2 million units under their forecast of what they were going to sell PlayStation 5 due to the shortages. So what's really impressive for PlayStation is even though they had record revenue, and even though they passed 21 billion in revenue, they did that despite not being able to sell the PlayStations that they wanted to sell. And so when you start to look at what they're forecasting for their game and network services segment into next year, you can see that right away they are being aggressive. So they believe that they're going to see a near third increase, or actually over a third, 34% increase in sales. That includes hardware, so that would be PlayStation 5. I presume that it includes PSVR 2 because, we're getting ready to see that, and you have to imagine that it's going to be out and released in the next fiscal year. Includes, obviously, accessories, first-party titles, and they also, curiously, see a positive impact of foreign exchange rates. So anytime you start to talk about these companies and how you report on their financials, exchange rates come into play. I wasn't going to get into that section or get into the details on that because it can get very confusing and detailed, and so it's not worth covering that piece of it, but just know that that plays a role as well. As you can see here on the slide, they are also, lost my train of thought. They're also spending more on expenses associated with acquisitions, including Bungie. So despite this huge increase in revenue that they foresee for the next fiscal year, as you can see, they're showing their operating profit, or their operating income to be specific, is actually quite a bit less. And that's because they're going to reinvest money. They're acquiring Bungie. They also said that other acquisitions are on the table. So now, the really interesting thing about PlayStation is where they are investing their money. And I want to speak to not only PlayStation here, but the broader conversation of the three as we come to the tail end of this video, which is, here is where PlayStation, on the left side of this chart here is where they believe gaming growth is going to go. So up through calendar year 2025, So as you can see, by calendar year 2022, which is the year we're in, obviously, if you add these together, they believe they're going to see about $18 billion in digital add-on revenue, and they're going to see a combined $18 billion in digital and physical console software. So what that is telling you is that PlayStation foresees that this year will be the year where digital add-ons, DLC, microtransactions, those games like Warzone, Apex Legends, Fortnite, people buying skins, etc., is going to match the revenue that they will see from all of their software sales, whether you buy digitally or physically combined. And so They believe that this gap is only going to widen. As you can see, next year they believe 20 billion compared to 18, 23 billion compared to 16, 24 billion compared to 17. So they believe by calendar year 2025, there's actually going to be 7 billion more, or about 30% more revenue in digital add-ons than actual software sales. And so that's leading PlayStation to drive towards revising their model, which, some PlayStation fans don't want to hear. We did speak about this pretty extensively on Bigcast this past week, so I'll link that below too if you want to hear me and Dan and Rick and Travis talk through this. But I wanted to call it out here as well because it doesn't only affect PlayStation. I can promise you all of these companies recognize this, and it's why we're seeing the shift, right? Xbox has been shifting for a while. They made this move first because they recognize it. It's where their investment has lied for a few years now. Nintendo seems to be moving there the slowest. That shouldn't really surprise anyone, but they do recognize it. You can read by where their investment money is going. PlayStation, no different. So as you can see here, fiscal year 2019 on the right side of this chart here, they invested 88% of their kind of investment resources into traditional games. So traditional games, as you think of PlayStation, would be your single player, narrative-driven, third-person adventure games. And they've been very successful in that, as we know, with only 12% into live service. By this year, so the rest of this year as we're speaking now, through the first quarter of 2023 calendar year, they're shifting that to nearly 50-50. That is a huge shift for PlayStation. That is a lot of money going into Bungie, of course, for the acquisition. It's going into studios like Haven by Jade Raymond and Fire Sprite, a lot of other things that they have working. By 2025, 3 years from now, they see their live service investment surpassing their traditional investment. Now, one thing that Hogue called out on our Bitcast, which was notable, is that if you notice, even though they see 55% of their investment money going towards live service in the future, they still are investing a huge amount of money into their traditional. In fact, more than they have in the past. So if you're a big PlayStation fan, don't panic and think, oh God, the games I love are going away. That's not necessarily the case. It's just that they know they have to grow the other side of the business. Coincidentally, they also recognize they have to reach more people. And again, something I've been talking about for a long time, many of us have. If you look at fiscal year 2019 here on this chart, almost all PS4 with some PC, a small sliver of PC. Obviously, by fiscal year 2022, you have PS4 and PS5. They started to increase their PC investment, and they have a little mobile there as well. But where they are driving towards is where PlayStation, so PS4, PS5, PSVR 2, would represent about 50 to 55% of their market space. However, they want mobile and PC to be a good 40 to 45% of their revenue stream as well. That, again, in 3 years' time, you're talking about a very, very large shift for this company. So, very interesting. This is a PlayStation-provided slide. It's projections, as you can see, from IDG Consulting and some targets for PlayStation as general. But this is really speaking to the gaming industry as a whole. And so I'm going to kind of leave us with thoughts on this slide because it applies to all three. On the left side, the gaming industry is continuing to grow year over year. Everyone expects that to continue. If you didn't know that, well, now you know. With, probably by calendar year 2026, 2027 at the latest being a $300 billion industry, which is just crazy, especially if you're seasoned like me and grew up where, gaming was a niche. Now, as you can see, if you weren't aware, again, mobile dominates the revenue stream within the gaming industry, and you can see the percentages of PC and console there as well. The good news is even if you look at mobile dominating, each of these segments grows year over year. Now, PC's kind of flat, which is interesting to me. It feels anecdotally like the PC market is growing, but according to these consulting group and what they're forecasting, it doesn't look like it's going to continue to grow that much, whereas console's growing by about 15% or so over the next few years. So kind of interesting there. Now, if you look at the right-hand side, this one is really interesting to me. So, console hardware is decreasing. Now, someone may immediately ask, well, on the left side, they're saying it's increasing. On the right side, they're saying it's decreasing. So on the left side, they're showing the total revenue of the console market, right? So the total revenue will increase. However, on the right-hand side, what they're showing is that the percentage of that revenue will actually decrease from console hardware. The same goes for physical console software. That shouldn't surprise anyone. Digital console software, the yellow bar, is actually interesting because as you can see, it's almost flat. So generally, those bottom three sections on the right-hand side of this chart, the consultants that look at the gaming industry are basically telling us these are going to be flat or decrease over the next few years. Where the money is going to be is in digital add-ons, which we've talked about already multiple times, and subscriptions. And so again, this is a chart that Jim Ryan presented to his PlayStation executive peers and leadership groups, basically showing that digital add-ons and subscription revenue are where the growth is in the market. That is where and why PlayStation is shifting their focus. Now, let's not think that they just started shifting. They've been shifting for a while, but just not as long as, say, Xbox. So it's just very interesting to see that even PlayStation, as we talk about Game Pass and PS Plus, believes that in the next 3 years, subscription revenue is going to double, or nearly double. Digital add-on revenue is going to increase by, 70-80%. So it's you can see why these console makers and why the big three are investing not only in their continued success of what they're good at, but where the market is going. And at the very bottom here, which I thought was very interesting, is Sony believes that they can still continue to grow their market share from 45% in the PS4 generation to over 50% in the PS5 generation. So there's an awful lot. I have been talking for a while. There is, as you would imagine, a lot more that you can break down with all of these slides. I will have a lot of links below for anyone who wants to go kind of find these things on their own or dive in a little deeper. As always, this is something I do regularly, not only for Season Gaming, but just because I enjoy it. I do some analyst type work for this in my career work, so I'm very familiar with the way all these slides and kind of charts break down. If it is something that you have questions on, if you have thoughts on, if you want to start a conversation with me on, or anything that I can provide further, please leave a comment. Please reach out if you're a patron listening to this on its initial release. Reach out on Patreon, reach out on our Discord, or reach out on Bitcast. I know Rick and Travis and Dan, we all talk about this stuff all the time as well, too. So it's just, it's not about pitting the three against each other. I think everyone listening to this from Season Gaming fans knows that. It's about just, understanding where these big three are, what they're doing, and finding it interesting, right? Because we love all three of them. We want to see all three of them continue and succeed. And the good news here, when you look at all this and you really dive into it, is they are. All three of these companies are healthy. All three of them are growing and investing in new things. And I foresee some fantastic times ahead. We often say we're in the golden age of gaming right now. I believe that to be true, but I got to be honest with all of you. It looks like it's going to get even better. So I'm super excited. As always, really appreciate all of you. Thank you, patrons, for supporting us here at Season Gaming. It is, the patron has been going for, 4 or 5 months now, and it has made a big difference. It's helped out some of our contributors. It's contributing to allowing us to create new content. And if you're not currently a patron, you can find the link below if you would like to check that out and see what you get for supporting Season Gaming and really like to support independent, honest gaming journalism. We would appreciate that as well. For now, thank you so much. As I said, sincerely appreciate all of you. And we will see you next month. Let me know what you think about this. I'm very curious. Take care.